From the Toronto Star, I'm Althia Raj, and this matters. After 4 weeks of campaigning, the federal party leaders head into the home stretch. This is an election that pollsters tell us nearly nobody wanted. Nobody, perhaps, except Liberal leader Justin Trudeau.
This is a really important moment in Canada's history.
He gambled, sending Canadians to the polls, hoping they'd return him with a majority. But things haven't played out as the Liberals expected. Polling puts the Grits and the Conservatives basically neck and neck nationally. But on the ground, what does the contest really look like? This Matters is devoting this entire week to covering the 44th federal election, and that's why they've welcomed me as a guest host. Today, we will take a deep dive into 3 battleground ridings with my Toronto Star colleagues. Heather Scoffield is the Star's Ottawa bureau chief and its economics columnist. Richard Warnica is a business feature writer who's been seconded to the politics team for the duration of the campaign. And Jeremy Nuttall is a Vancouver-based reporter who covers politics in BC for the Star. Welcome to all of you.
Hello.
Nice to be here. Thank you.
Great to be here. Thanks.
You've all been to some really interesting places and seen some local contests up close. I want you to pick one riding you've been to. Tell me about it and why you think it's significant in this election. Heather, I know you've been to lots of places, so let me start with you. Where do you want to bring us?
So I've done some traveling around Toronto and the suburbs, and then I went out to the Atlantic, to the Maritimes, traveling through Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, and I really find the riding of Cumberland-Colchester very interesting. It was a very tight race the last time. The Liberals won it with Lenore Zann with only, there was about a 300 vote margin, so really tight. And we've got a showdown happening again this time where the Conservatives, it looks like they could very well win it. And it's that kind of tight battleground that I find quite interesting because, you know, unlike the United States, I think people, even in Atlantic Canada, where, you know, we look at the electoral map and it's a sea of red and you think, okay, yeah, they're always Liberal. No, actually, they're not always Liberal. And even within this riding, we've seen a lot of back and forth. Even Lenore Zann she used to be an NDP MLA. So there's a lot of movement there. And I wanted to really understand what would make people go from one party to another. So I went to that riding just a few days ago, and I did some door knocking with Steve Ellis, who is the Conservative candidate. And they're just coming out of a provincial election. So there's a lot of residual feeling around that election. And the Conservatives won. They surprised the progressive Conservatives there at the provincial level. They surprised everybody. And so there's still a lot of talk about that. And then in come the federal candidates. So Steve Ellis is the Conservative candidate. He is a doctor, very well known regionally because he led the COVID effort for that region and was, out there on Facebook every day. And, in people's homes, giving messages every day about how to deal with COVID. And as you know, Nova Scotia was quite successful in dealing with COVID. And so he's out there campaigning.
Hey everybody, it's Dr. Steve Ellis coming to you live here from downtown Spring Hill. It's important for people to know that we're continuing to knock on doors, and very important for us that people know that we're out here in every small town there is. It's important also for people to know that the main thing we're hearing still at the doors is healthcare. He's
talking about healthcare, which is fascinating to me because it's a provincial responsibility, but it's what people want to hear. And he seems to have this knack of being able to just get right down into the concerns of people post-pandemic and during the pandemic and talk to them about how his party's platform would confront those fears. So that seems to be, resonating there. Lenore Zann has obviously got name recognition. She's taken a bit of heat for how she dealt with the mass shooting of a couple of years ago. So it looks, even though she's the incumbent and has a bit of an advantage, it looks like it's an uphill battle for her.
You mean the federal Liberals' kind of refusal to call an inquiry into their RCMP?
Yeah, I think it was in her riding where that took place. And so the Liberal government's reluctance to be more proactive on that front is something that, she's got to speak for that.
Let's pause here for a second and we'll go to Richard and we'll loop back to some of the perhaps themes that we're exploring because it is a really interesting contest. Richard, you have also been to a very interesting contest. Where do you want to bring us?
Well, I mean, thank you, first of all, for calling the suburbs of Toronto interesting. That it's a very rare opinion from a national media elite. I joke. So I spent a bunch of time in York Region, which is the cluster of suburbs right north of Toronto. And I specifically went up there to look at Aurora Oak Ridge's Richmond Hill initially, it's a swing riding in the sense that it swings between Liberal and Conservative at elections. But a couple of years ago, it literally swung in between elections when Leona Aleslev, who was elected as a Liberal, switched sides to the Conservatives and then narrowly beat the Liberals again in 2019.
After careful and deliberate consideration, I must withdraw from the government benches to take my seat among the ranks of my Conservative colleagues and join Her Majesty's loyal opposition.
And heading into this campaign, this was a seat that the Liberals were absolutely targeting. They were targeting a sweep, basically, in York Region, hoping that those were the seats that were going to give them a majority. And what I have found fascinating on the ground up there, and I'm so interested to hear what you guys are seeing in other parts of the country, because the speed at which the dynamic of this election changed in the GTA, I think, surprised everybody, every party. The Liberals came in thinking they were going to be on the offense. They are 100% on the defense right now. A lot of the ridings where we thought they were going to be battlegrounds, ridings to watch, are, I would say, much less so now. And some of those much more marginal ridings that were looking to be much stronger Liberal seats are, I think, in play in a way they did not expect.
What makes you think that the parties did not expect that?
Well, I mean, I'll give you one example, which is Markham-Stouffville, which was Jane Philpott's old seat. Not as strong a Liberal seat as the last sort of decade would indicate, but the Conservatives didn't have it targeted coming in. And something that's indicative of that is they've nominated a 21-year-old self-professed West Wing fanatic named Ben Smith, who could very well now end up as an MP. He's sort of the classic university-age student who ends up as a name on a ballot, who now could win because this is now a very winnable seat. Something else that I've really heard from a number of Conservative campaigns in the region is that they've had trouble getting enough volunteers. They think they could sweep York possibly, and that could make Aaron O'Toole prime minister, but they internally are not as confident about their electoral infrastructure and the ability to then deliver all that support that they're seeing to the polls on election day.
So in some ways, it all comes down to GOTV, get out the vote effort.
Yeah, absolutely. I was talking to a senior Harper Conservative yesterday who's not involved in this campaign, but they were saying they think the support is stronger for O'Toole on the ground. It's stronger for the Conservatives, but very worried that the Liberals still have that GOTV advantage and that their digital campaign infrastructure is still stronger. And if they lose, that's where they think they're going to lose in the GTA.
So, sometimes I talk to candidates who all think they're going to win. But what makes you think here that the Conservatives are not just telling you something? Are the Liberals also telling you that they're worried?
Well, I mean, like the candidates won't. I was out with Leah Taylor-Roy, who's competing in Aurora Oak Ridge's Richmond Hill, and outwardly they give a real sense of confidence. But conversations with organizers, yeah, they're definitely worried. And, 4 weeks ago, when you would talk to them, it would be, well, it's a toss-up for the majority. And now it's, well, we're still hoping we can squeak out a minority, basically.
Interesting stuff. Jeremy, now we're going all the way across the country. You are actually covering a riding with a star candidate, if I understand correctly.
Yes.
If it's the riding, I think you're going to talk to me about.
That's the one. I'm in a different riding right now for something else. But yes, I've been to West Vancouver, Sunshine Coast, sea to sky country. And it's basically it's a very interesting riding for a number of reasons. One of them is that is where Avi Lewis is running. And Avi Lewis, of course, former journalist, VJ, author, comes from a very political family, married to Naomi Klein. And he's running in a riding that has basically had everybody represented in the last 25 years or so, except for the NDP and the Bloc Québécois. Because back in, I think it was 2008, Blair Wilson, who was then a Liberal MP, left the Liberals, sat as an independent for a bit, then joined the Green Party. And it wasn't it was a very strange thing when that happened, but the race itself is super tight.
super tight with the NDP as a player? Because it seems like last time I checked, they were like definitely nowhere close to finishing in the top even 3, I think.
That's where it gets interesting, right? Because you've got, it was formerly represented by John Weston, and he's a conservative. In 2015, Weston lost to the former mayor of West Vancouver, Pamela Goldsmith-Jones. She was a very popular mayor, and so she basically, pushed him out of the seat. And then Jones didn't run again, and it was won by a young environmental lawyer named Patrick Weller. Of course, Patrick is running for re-election this time. But in that same election last time, the Green Party actually came third. The NDP came fourth, about 5,000 votes behind the Green Party. And so here's the question, right? Is Avi Lewis's star power enough to catapult him past the Green Party? If the Green Party and NDP votes combine, it would be enough to take out the Liberal candidate. But then you have another race at the top between a riding that is, heavily reliant on Conservative voters in West Vancouver, and then between the Liberal voters as well in the same area, which sort of can also put it as a Liberal and Conservative type battle as well. So it's not quite anyone's race. It could be determined that depending on if Avi Lewis's star power has an effect.
What does it take to tip the scales in favor of justice for working people and for the planet we all call home? My name is Avi Lewis, and I've been searching for the answer to that question all my life.
Why did he even want to run there?
He lives there. This riding as well it's such an insane riding geographically because it includes part of Metro Vancouver, but then it also includes the Sunshine Coast and Whistler. And this is where the Beachcombers was set, part of it. But the Sunshine Coast is you sort of have this, it's full of older retirees and of course like a young sort of younger working class population. There's a lot of green vote potential there because it's sort of environmentally conscious type retirees. But then you get to West Van and you've got more of a conservative base. You go up to Whistler and it's Liberal territory. And the only area that really would be, I think, reliably NDP would be Squamish, where it's kind of working class. It's not as much of a resort town as Whistler. A lot of people who work in Whistler actually live in Squamish because it's more affordable. So yeah, it's such a mix of different political ideals, geography, and it's going to be a very interesting race to watch.
Okay, I want to bring Heather and Richard back into this conversation because what I'm hearing is kind of different dynamics play out across the country. That in Heather's case, you have a star local candidate that might change things. In Jeremy's case, with Avi Lewis, maybe the chance that a star NDP candidate might completely reverse a trend in that riding. But in Richard's case, it seems like it's more about perhaps the popular mood. What are the threads that you've noticed through your reporting?
I'm glad you zeroed in on that. I did a lot of talking to, strategists in Atlantic Canada about, the propensity of voters to change and what makes them change lanes or shakes them off their previous loyalties. And I talked to Bill Casey, who he represented Cumberland-Colchester for quite a while at the federal level, but he has run for the Progressive Conservatives and the Conservatives and the Liberals, and also won the seat as an independent at one time. So
yeah, he defected, right? Yeah. He left the Conservative caucus.
Yeah, he did. And he won anyway, but he actually just ran in the provincial election and lost. So anyway, he knows all about changing lanes and why people would do that. And he emphasizes very much that in the Atlantic region, there are some big movements where voters sometimes, they have rejected the Liberals in the past and gone really blue or the other way around. But generally, the trend over time there is very much a local candidate really matters, and that's who they're voting for. Although it's within Halifax, you do get some NDP strength, and I think we'll probably see a bit of that on voting day as well.
Richard, what are the trends that you've noticed?
Something that I found really interesting, and I don't think this will be a surprise, is that there is a lot of anger out there. One Liberal volunteer I was talking to said that someone threatened to shoot him if he didn't get off his lawn right away. And the candidate said, people have called her disgusting, said Justin Trudeau's disgusting.
Shoot them with a gun?
Yeah. So he said he did not stick around long enough to know if it was a serious threat or an exaggeration, but it was enough to... this guy was legitimately mad at the Liberals. And, Conservatives are also saying they are hearing a huge amount of anger at the doors, but they don't know if that anger is going to translate into votes for them. I did a big feature on the People's Party 2 years ago in 2019, and the mood from the Conservatives then was, they are not worried. These guys are a joke. I think they are legitimately worried in some ridings where, you're going to see a three-way split. It's going to be 1 or 2 percentage point that part of their base that is very motivated by anti-lockdowns, anti-vaccine passports might turn to the PPC. And it wouldn't take a huge amount of votes going one way or another to swing some of these suburban Toronto seats and swing the election.
I've been surprised to see the strength also in southwestern Ontario for the PPC. Sorry, I'm still processing the wanting to shoot the door knocker. I've never heard that before in Canadian politics.
I should have actually called the police. I mean, if the owner is a gun owner, then that's actually reason enough to take your gun away legally.
Yeah. I mean, again, it's hard to know if you're not there, whether it's somebody being like, come on now, get out of here before I get my gun, in a joking way, or if it's someone who legitimately hates the prime minister so much that he wants to shoot one of his volunteers. But anyway, it's not something I've heard of a lot covering federal politics in this country, at least. It reminds me a bit more of covering Trump in 2016 in the States.
I found it interesting in Atlantic Canada that, I was expecting to see anger at the door, and I wasn't. I was seeing a lot of fatigue and just get us out of this pandemic and please find us some answers. So more of a weariness rather than anger. And then moving into Quebec, where I've also just spent some time as well. It was interesting to me that, every riding, especially around Montreal, North Shore, South Shore they're very much up for grabs. Often a Bloc Québécois versus Liberal fight for those seats, but things have kind of fallen apart, I think, for the Bloc Québécois a little bit. So opening up opportunities for the NDP in some areas as well. But the appeal that the leader, the Bloc Québécois, is pushing is really, it's nothing to do with the pandemic, and it's really more to stir up that separatist sentiment or the Quebec nationalist sentiment, against the federal government, as opposed to even talking about the pandemic.
Is anger and apathy what you've also noticed, Jeremy, when you've gone door knocking?
No, I'd have to say, particularly in West Van, it's a more of a gentle kind of a riding. It's by the sea. It's a mountain, that runs into the sea. There's big, dreamy trees everywhere. It's quite affluent. It's probably the wealthiest riding in the country. So, not a lot of that kind of raw anger. When I went door knocking with the Liberal candidate, everybody gave him a few minutes, except for actually there was only one person, I think, who didn't want to talk. And she wasn't particularly rude about it. She just said she wasn't interested. And that was that. There, I think the issues are not so much anger towards the current government, but concern over environmental issues and things of that nature, especially because of the wildfires up in the interior of British Columbia, bringing a lot of smoke to that region over the summertime and in other summers. So yeah, not the anger, just the concern over environmental issues, et cetera. But again, it is a more, it's just a very gentle kind of a riding.
I was going to say, Jeremy, if you can afford to live in West Van, you probably don't have too much to be upset about.
Exactly. Yeah.
I was going to suggest that living by the ocean probably makes you less angry. But what are the things that, speaking about the BC wildfires, sometimes when reporters are covering the campaigns, we spend so much time talking about the party leaders' campaigns. And truthfully, that's not actually where the contest happens. Are there bumbling local issues or issues that you heard about that you think actually might matter come Election Day?
The only thing that I find particularly interesting is that, so John Weston, he lost the election in 2015, didn't run in 2019. But apparently there was a bit of controversy over how much time he was spending in Ottawa versus how much time he spent in his riding when he was last a member of parliament. So I'm wondering if that's going to come back to haunt him or not.
What about you, Richard or Heather?
I would say everywhere I go in the GTA, housing comes up, housing prices. But what's interesting is I don't know that any party has carved out a winnable niche on this. It tends to be, aside from the national issues, if you're in Toronto, you hear climate change a lot, you hear Indigenous reconciliation a lot, but everywhere, it's what are you going to do to get housing prices under control? But I have not heard that anger directed specifically toward a party or that belief from local people on the ground that there is a party that has a convincing answer on that.
All right, Heather, where are you going? What should readers be seeing?
Where are we not going? That's where the question is for the next final day. So we are covering all the leaders' tours here and there. So we've got Alex Ballingal going out with the NDP and Raisa Patel doing a bit of time with the NDP as well. Tonda McCharles heading out with the Liberals. Alex Boudoulier heading out with the Conservatives. And of course, Althia, you're going to head out on all of those buses. It'll be very interesting to see where the leaders target their travels over the next few days, because, we started out this campaign saying, okay, the Liberals needed 15 seats to make a majority. It's a very different question right now, because it's a question, can they even hold on to the seats that they had before? So where will they target? They're not just talking about targeting those 15 seats now. They're having to spread their efforts a lot more thinly to just hang on to what they have. And the NDP, they started out with a very targeted campaign looking at ridings that they thought they could win. But now all of a sudden the scope for winning has expanded for them. And so they've got to, spend the last days targeting more ridings than they initially thought. And the Conservatives, it'll be very interesting where they put their efforts. Do they think they could make some inroads in Quebec? Initially they thought, as Richard has mentioned, initially they thought that they probably wouldn't have much of a chance in the suburbs around Toronto. And now it looks like they do. So are they going to have to spend some more effort and time there? And of course, BC has this beautiful tradition of volatility that political reporters like so much. I think they'll all end up spending some time out there along with our reporters.
Thank you, all three of you. This was so interesting. Heather Scoffield, Jeremy Nuttall, Richard Warnica, thank you so much.
Thanks, guys. Talk to you soon.
Althia.
And thank you, of course, for listening. Thanks to the entire This Matters team for letting me sit in this chair. Your regular host will be here this week exploring the issues of this campaign. I will be on the campaign trail, as Heather mentioned, but back on Election Day. Let's talk soon.